thank you guys again for joining the group here. And you can see my PowerPoint, right? The regular view. Let me see here. Okay, perfect. And so essentially the talk that I put together was talking about the intersectionality of role models within academic medicine. And just for some background, I basically am a Marylander for life. I grew up in Catonsville, went to UMBC for undergrad. I went to Maryland for medical school, and then for residency, was fortunate enough to stay here as well. And my email address is there. If Shannon, you have any questions or anything that you wanted to ask about down the road. And basically, this concept was really interesting, the intersectionality of role models and mentorship within academic medicine, because there was a term that I was not very familiar with before I was invited to speak by one of the Maryland med students. So I'll talk about that here. But just disclaimer off the bat, all the things that we talk about here, completely my own thoughts and beliefs, not representative of my medical school or residency program or anything. And so essentially, like I said, the first time that I got the email from Maddie in talking about intersectionality, I totally felt like, old guy trying to interpret, kind of a millennial startup offer or something like that. I was like, what is intersectionality? And interestingly, pretty much this was my face right here from this meme. And when I started looking at it, there was a really interesting paper from Wilson et al. In 2019 that defined intersectionality as an intellectual concept for those thinking about the ways that race, gender, and other social identities converge to create forms of oppression. And the original idea was actually coined by a legal theorist in the 80s, Kimberly Crenshaw, who was working on anti-discrimination law. Since that time, it's been applied to different social sciences, psychology, and policymaking, but only recently has it been applied to the framework of medicine, which is really fascinating. And I think that the fact that I really appreciated about approaching things from a framework of intersectionality is that it's not trying to homogenize different groups. So it's not saying that everybody who was raised on the inner city of Baltimore has the same experience, or everybody who emigrated from X, Y, or Z country has the same experience. Each person has individual social identities, whether it's talking about socioeconomic disparity, different family structures, where they are in life, whether it's somebody who's coming straight from college or somebody who is a little bit more, advanced in their career and trying to transition careers. Those are all different forms of intersectionality that I felt were invaluable, that weren't necessarily the cookie cutter approach of diversity as we typically look at it. So before we go further, and I guess, I was going to bug Shannon about this, and Dr. William, please chime in as well. If you guys had any family members in medicine before you chose the career when you were going into it?
None.
Dr.
Yeah,
William?
lots of physicians, and my dad and my grandfather on my father's side.
My goodness, that's awesome. That's awesome. And basically, the reason that I brought this up in the prior groups is talking about, there's this often used quote, "You can't be what you can't see." And there was actually a title of a book that they were describing the experiences of the 700 at-risk African-American youth from the Chicago housing projects. And this was, I think, in the 60s or 70s. And they basically set these, students up with out-of-school opportunities with mentorship, scholarship, and different internship things that they could do. And they had 2 decades of follow-up, which is phenomenal. And they just looked at the success that these students had despite coming from a group where otherwise they may have not had any of these opportunities or financial ability to perform and participate in these different opportunities. And so for me, I think looking at role models in medicine, these are the 3 big things that kind of stuck out, like almost a 3-tiered approach. Is that the first concept is the inception of the idea that even accomplishing X, Y, or Z is possible. Here we're talking about medicine, so even having the idea that becoming a doctor is a possibility from the group you're coming in. So maybe maybe you can't. It's not correct to say you can't be what you can't see, but it's really hard to be what you can't see. And so a lot of us who have had family members or adjacent family members or friends in that group, we can see ourselves being in that profession, or seeing ourselves go through college or medical school and being there. But for somebody who doesn't have that, I think even that idea is such an abstract that role models really have a duty to provide. So somebody that looks like you or has gone through the same life experiences, somebody that grew up in your neighborhood, somebody that went to your high school, that you can agree with, and you can kind of see yourself in them, I felt was so important. And The second part here, so I'll put a little check on that aspect. So that's that first component. The second part, and we'll talk about providing mentorship, and whether this is talking about at a level of high school, college, and medical school. And I really like this, watering plant analogy here. So there's tangible and intangible steps towards mentorship that I'm sure you guys have experienced as well. But the tangible components is somebody who's in high school that, not a lot of their family members have gone to college, or, and I'm talking, this could be somebody who grew up in an inner city, somebody who's grown up on a farm on North Dakota and all their family members haven't gone to college and they kind of just went straight into the family business or whatever. Being, having the mentors to provide that possibility of here's what a college application looks like. This is a primary application. This is a secondary application. This is the fees that you have to pay. This is an essay that you have to compile. Once you're able to get into college, having mentors that are able to guide you to the steps of pursuing higher, opportunities, whether it's PhD, medical school, physics, whatever the case is, undergraduate research, having tangible components in place to encourage you to do that. Applying to medical school, I mean, that's such a daunting process when you're a senior or junior in college. All these applications, you're looking at, these different tests that you have to take, preparing for interviews. That's, if somebody, and I'll talk about this in the intangible component, but if somebody has never, had a dinner table growing up, and all of a sudden they're asked to go to these interview dinners and having to sit with these kind of higher level authorities or corporate figures and being uncomfortable in that spot, I think mentorship really has an important role to play there as far as grooming folks for that. And then again, this last point on the tangible component is even specialty. Somebody who is, married, has kids, who's in medicine, they have a very different approach to what they want to pursue in specialty to fit their framework of their personal life, as opposed to somebody who's in, young 20-something who is single and has, a different set of time frames and constraints. And so having mentors that have gone through that process that can really shed light on what it looks to be in a particular area is, I think, is so important. And the intangibles, motivation for somebody, whether it be talking them through the process, grooming, like prepping for interviews, and setting tangible goals of I have to take this test by this time frame, or I have to prepare for this interview in this way. And so those are things that I felt were really important to that second component of providing mentorship. And so I'll check that off there. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was really the role models for promotion and tenure, because if you're accomplishing these things, that you have mentors capable of showing you that they can be doctors, but then are they being rewarded for their skills as researchers, for providing good clinical care, for being good educators? Are they actually having that linear mobility in their career that will then encourage somebody to follow that same idea? And so I found this paper from 1998, which I think is still relevant. It was a JAMA paper that surveyed 3,000 full-time faculty across 24 medical schools, and they measured the attainment of senior rank, and that's qualifying as associate or full professor. And the odds ratio, and they compared this to white faculty members at that time, and this was irrespective of research productivity or years they had been with that facility or faculty. And they found that Black faculty had an odds ratio of 0.33 of attaining senior rank, and Hispanic faculty had the odds ratio of 0.36. And we're saying this is 1998, so let's look at things more recently. So this is a Harvard Business Review as recently as 2018. Only 18% of hospital CEOs and 16% of deans or department heads were female. And I think as we look at our medical school representation and seeing, at Maryland, for example, my medical school class was 60% female physicians. And so looking at that and seeing the reflection here, if you're not having folks that have gone through the same quote unquote pipeline as you, and you're not seeing them, rise to the ranks that you hope to one day be at, what is your motivation to succeed there? Because you're not going to be necessarily rewarded. And there's other challenges that we can talk about. And please, you guys are welcome to chime in at any point, but it was, challenges as far as female physicians and accomplishing these positions. A lot of times they have roles beyond the hospital, and this was a survey that was performed. A lot of times they found that female physicians were caretakers for not only their kids and immediate family, but they were given the burden of being tertiary caretakers for elderly parents, for other family members that are falling sick and having to go through that process. And so it was, this other challenges beyond even the scope of medicine that are inlaid there, that becomes even more of a burden when you're saying that these folks are not necessarily getting promoted to these higher level positions. So that was another thing that I found interesting. And here was a figure that I saw from AAMC in 2016, and it was looking at diversity trends from 1966 until 2015. And the kind of pertinent figures here, it's that the blue circles there is full professor, and the blue squares are assistant professor. And so while assistant professor has had a nice little slope there within the last 2 decades or so, the full professorship has still been pretty damning statistic there. So there's a dearth of underrepresented minorities at professorship, less than 6%, and associate professors less than 8%. And if we look at the y-axis, I mean, the top end of it is 12% right there. And so, and here I am talking about our medical school being more and more diverse and having 65% female, physicians rising up to the ranks, and that's not being reflected in their promotions or their positive correlation to these faculty positions. So that was pretty significant for me, and pretty daunting when I looked at it. But after looking at all these were the different discussion points that I'd had spoken with the prior groups, is really your thoughts about mentors in medicine and their real role in career development, particular experiences that you guys have had or disparities that you've seen, whether addressed with role models or not, agreeing with the idea or not agreeing with the idea that you can't be what you can't see, and a certain burden of mentorship. Certain folks are being disproportionately asked to speak at certain events or constantly be the mentor for X, Y, or Z person because of their background. And so a certain degree of pressure that gets put on them. And so any thoughts that you guys had about what we talked about, I'd love to hear them.
I guess I will say something just quickly, is that starting out through my clinical years, I didn't see as many female chief residents. Mm-hmm. And I think the population of residents was a bit more heavily weighted on male gender. But now that I've been going through more rotations, I've come into contact with many more female chief residents. The one sub-internship that I did for surgery in Connecticut, the 2 chief residents of that year were female. The next year they were going to be female again, both of them. And then the year after that was going to be 1 female, 1 male. So it's just showing me that more females are going into these male dominated areas. And I think that that's also very, it's inspiring and kind of motivational for me to see that, because then I see that, oh, they're making it to these levels and I'm going to make it to those levels too. I just have to make sure I continue to keep my head down, work hard, study, show what I have, learn everything I can, and I'll be just like them. I can even move higher. So I think that's really great to see now.
No, absolutely. And just kind of reflecting on our own program here at Maryland, we have a total of 5 chief residents for the internal medicine program, because 3 end up being at the University of Maryland, main campus. 1 of us ends up being at the VA, and then 1 of us ends up being at Mercy Medical Center. So this year, right now, the way it stands, so 4 of the 5 chief residents are female, and the Mercy chief just happens to be a male this year, and then it'll be me next year. And the other 4 chief residents are also female for next year at Maryland. And so 4 out of 5 for the past 2 years have been female. And it's been kind of in that same grouping. It's been almost a 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 each of the years that since I've been a 3rd year medical student here. And so interesting that our program director, Dr. Wolfstall, that I'm sure Dr. Williams knows, she's been in this position for, I think, 27 years. And so she's one of the longest standing program directors, if not the longest standing in, the academic programs that I know of. And so, and having that from the top down, just reflecting was so valuable going through it.
I have to say, I never thought about being anything other than a doc, and probably my family background had everything to do with that. And I think of the mentors I've had from time to time over the years, or times when I've really lacked for mentorship, and it's certainly nice to have someone you value as a mentor. I was thinking about this hard to be, which you can't see, and outreach at the level of elementary school, junior and high school, in areas of less privilege, down there at Harbor, maybe across into Cherry Hill. But it's a mixed bag in the sense that, number one, this sort of idea that you're kind of rolling in as the white knight, and the danger in that, uh, and parents and other uh, adults feel like, well, where do you get off? Suddenly thinking you're going to be the magic bullet for my child. And then the other thing is sustainability. I think some of the worst things you can do is kind of roll in and, then lose enthusiasm or whatever, and then you roll out. But having said all that, if there was some way to open up more awareness in underprivileged communities of other occupational possibilities, and stimulate desire and goals and reason for that study when others are saying, why are you doing that? Anyway, just some thoughts off the top of my head.
No, I think that's super relevant, and especially here at, again, I can only speak to Maryland because I've having gone through that process myself. Is during first and second year of medical school, during the preclinical years, we have these service learning projects that we get to be a part of, and we had the opportunity. I think there's a few different STEM programs that are trying to recruit students from an earlier standpoint, and this is all in the West Baltimore population, right around where University of Maryland is located. And so there's the CURE program, there's the Bliss Young Women program, and so there's these different schools that partner with University of Maryland, and there are first and second year medical students that not only review applications for students applying to college. They also provide different sort of mentorship from a level of doing tutoring on a week-to-week basis, and really making this as a possibility that this is something they can pursue. And so that's very interesting that you mentioned that, Dr. Williams, and it has to be sustainable in that way, that whether it is built into a medical school curriculum or a component of the residency program that's adjacent to these at-risk areas, I think that's a really good tangible way of being sustainable. And it has a different group of people every like 1 to 2 years that are kind of fresh and getting a new view of it. And so there's some longitudinal component, but then there's also that reinvigoration. So you're getting like kind of fresh infusion of ideas rather than people that, like you mentioned, could get burned out. And as a result, you leave it and it ends up being almost worse than where you were a year before.
Yeah, it sounds like a very good model. And I think even a better model, say for like Cherry Hill, if someone who looked like most of the residents in Cherry Hill was several folks of color were part of that process, I think it would be even more valuable.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I just wanted to point out, these were some of the folks that when I was a student, if you guys can see there, we had Dr. Foxwell right here, passed away earlier this year, who was the Dean of Admissions at Maryland, and then Dr. Kazada, who's over here, who's now the Dean of Admissions, Dr. Patel, Dr. Parker. So I think I was so fortunate to have such a diverse group of mentors going through the process. And me personally, being from Pakistan originally, like there's not any shortage of folks that I can look to and say, hey, this person kind of looks like me and has been through the same process. And I give Dr. Patel a hard time about this, but that's one of the things that's nice. For me, I consider myself very privileged to be able to do that. And other folks that don't necessarily have that same reflection, whether it's their program or whether this is systemic from where they grew up, not having had that, I feel like that is one of the inherent challenges of being able to propel yourself to being in one of these careers when you haven't seen somebody do it. So I think that's definitely one of the tangible steps that hopefully we're working to correct to some degree, but obviously a lot more work needs to be done on that end. But no, I really appreciate you guys. We had some great discussions earlier from folks that had gone through this, but your guys' input was awesome.
Thank you, Zulkarnain. I remember you very well, respectful, humility, curiosity, and I know that'll sustain you throughout your career.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. I really appreciate it. And Shannon, what are you thinking of going into? You mentioned the surgical sub internships that you had done as well.
Yeah, I'm interested in general surgery.
All right.
So it was nice to see a lot of female surgeons. And during my sub internship, actually, the hospital I was at, they accepted a new attending, an endocrinology surgeon, and she was phenomenal and just another like inspiration to see just a female being in the head of the endocrine surgery, that they're starting up, so knowledgeable, wanting to teach, just always there for you to ask questions. And as a student in her OR that I was in one very long Tuesday, which was her parathyroid day, I was allowed to do so much because I was just showing the interest, and she took the time to make sure I knew what she wanted when she said certain things, that I was able to be a part of the operation a bit more than maybe just one retraction and hands on the patient. So she really wanted to incorporate everyone in the case. And I found that it was really rewarding experience. And it was something that I look at and I say, oh, I want to do that later. I want to make sure that when I'm in the position that I can teach someone, I can, maybe if I'm not their mentor, I can at least give them that and give them that boost of confidence. They can bring that on to others. It's kind of the pay it forward aspect that I like.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I 100% agree. And that's kind of the drive to be able to do that. And I think upcoming this spring, I'm trying to go back to my elementary school, which is actually in Woodlawn, Maryland. And so, Shannon, I'm not sure if you're from the area or not, but Dr. Williams, Woodlawn is kind of it's a very high risk area. It's a little bit of a rougher neighborhood. And that's where when we first came to the U.S. in 2000, we were for a while. And I don't think it was quite as challenging even at that point as it is now. And so, going back to my elementary school there and talking to the students, I think this is for like their 5th grade graduation. And so even mentioning from that standpoint, like having gone through this school, you can, do X, Y, or Z. And it's like, I highly valuable experience that I had at that elementary school, and all the faculty that I was so dedicated, even from, again, 4th, 5th grade students, and propelling them to these heights. And so, and Dr. Williams, gives his time to mentor students, not only from other medical schools and all that, but also from Maryland. And we go over and we take up his time in the afternoon. I'm sure, Dr. Williams could have headed home and been with his family by that point. And he was there on these afternoons on like Wednesdays and Thursdays, like 5, 6 p.m., helping us out how to do physical exams. So, that's a huge component of giving back that Shannon, you mentioned, and Dr. Williams, I think, embodies that fully.
I can attest to that. I see Dr. Williams as such an amazing mentor for myself. I did my internal medicine core clerkship with him at Harbor and a sub internship as well. And he's always been there for advice and to help me out in times where I may feel defeated or that this is a very daunting process. And it's always great, even if it's one line in an email, it's just calming. I know it's okay. So I know for a fact that it's not just me that feels that way.
This is a great way to end the day for me.
No, seriously, Dr. Williams, we really appreciate everything that you've done. And, I wish I would have put one of our pictures. I don't think we ever got a group picture during ICM2, but I would have thrown that up here. That would have been so appropriate. No, but seriously, thank you guys for attending. And anytime, Shannon, happy to help. If you have any questions about Maryland or anything that I could contribute, my email address, and I'll put it here in the chat if I can. You're welcome to reach out anytime that you have any questions or anything like that.
I appreciate that. And you're a very natural presenter. It was such a pleasure listening to this presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I'm going to put my email address right here. It's a long one, so that's why I will put it in here. And all the letters, like Dr. Williams was saying, the Q&A right after, like, you know, people want to put a little U after the Q. And so that's why in my name, it's a little bit challenging. So, but there it is. But guys, I will let you go, and please enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And I think the weather is getting a little bit nicer. I see out the window, it's a little bit sunnier. So please have a good one, and stay safe.
Hope our lives intersect in the future.
Yes, sir, Dr. Williams. Don't worry. I'll be in the area for the foreseeable future if they keep me around after chief resident year. So.
Shannon, same thing.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys.
Bye now.
Take care now.
Bye.